He was still awake. He knew exactly what the medication would do, and he was afraid to fall asleep. I noticed it the second I stepped close enough to prepare the syringe, not the fear itself. I've seen fear hundreds of times in hospice. I noticed the awareness. His eyes weren't drifting. They weren't glassy or unfocused. They were locked on me, steady, alert, tracking every small movement of my hands. That's what made my stomach tighten. Patients who are that close to the end usually don't watch you like that. I had already checked his vitals. I had already reviewed his chart. End-stage lung cancer, brain and liver metastases, declining fast. Nothing about the situation was unusual on paper. This was a standard hospice visit. Comfort medications, relief, routine, the kind of work I've done long enough to perform almost on autopilot. But this didn't feel routine. His breathing was fast and shallow, the kind that tells you the body is working harder than it should. His hands rested on the blanket, thin veins raised, fingers slightly curled like they'd been holding tension for too long. When I cleaned the injection site, he flinched not from pain but from anticipation. "Elaine," he said quietly, not slurred, not confused, clear. That alone was enough to make me pause. Most patients don't say your name like that at this stage. They forget it, or they mix it up, or they don't speak at all. When he said it, it sounded intentional, like he wanted to be sure I was listening. I looked up from the syringe. "I'm right here," I said, keeping my voice steady. Calm matters in moments like this. Calm keeps families from panicking. Calm keeps patients from spiraling. His eyes flicked past me for half a second toward the hallway outside the bedroom, then snapped back to my face. "Don't let me fall asleep," he said. It wasn't a request. It was a warning. I'd heard people beg not to die. I'd heard people beg for pain to stop. I'd even heard people ask me to stay a little longer. I had never heard someone this close to death ask to stay awake, like sleep itself was the threat. I didn't answer right away. Nurses learn when silence is safer than reassurance. If you promise the wrong thing, you spend the rest of the night undoing it. "This will help your breathing," I said instead. "You've been working really hard." He shook his head just barely. "I know," he said. "I know what it does." That was the moment something shifted inside me, because he wasn't wrong. He did know. He wasn't confused about medication or process. He understood exactly what relief would cost him. Behind me, I could feel someone watching. His daughter stood near the doorway, arms wrapped around herself, eyes fixed on the syringe like it might turn into something dangerous if she stared too long. She hadn't said much since I arrived. Families don't always talk when fear settles in. Sometimes they just wait for the professional to take control. I'd been that professional for a long time, long enough to recognize the weight of the moment, long enough to know that once medication goes in, there's no undo button. He swallowed hard. "Please," he said, "if I sleep, I won't stop it." I didn't ask what he meant. Not yet. Hospice has taught me that you don't chase meaning before you stabilize the body. You don't pull on a thread until you know how tight it's wrapped. I took a slow breath and lowered the syringe slightly, just enough to show I was listening. "What are you trying to stop?" I asked. His eyes flicked to the hallway again. This time they stayed there a beat too long. "It comes closer when I'm not paying attention," he said. That was when I felt the unease settle. Not fear, not belief. Something colder. The kind of discomfort that comes when your training explains the symptoms, but your instincts tell you this case isn't going to follow the usual path. I'd seen hallucinations. I'd seen terminal agitation. I'd seen patients talk to people who weren't there. This wasn't that. This was a man trying to stay conscious out of self-preservation. I gently set the syringe down on the bedside tray, not because I decided not to give it, but because I needed another second to think. That second mattered. Before I could speak again, his daughter's voice cracked behind me. "Dad," she said, "you're scaring the kids." That sentence landed heavier than anything else in the room. He closed his eyes for half a second, then forced them open again like it physically hurt to blink. "I know," he said. "That's why they can't be near it." Near what my brain supplied automatically, but my mouth stayed quiet. I straightened and turned slightly toward his daughter. "Can you give us a moment?" I asked. "Just a minute." She hesitated, then nodded and stepped back into the hallway. I heard her whisper something sharp and urgent, probably to keep the kids where they were. The house beyond the bedroom felt too quiet, like everyone was holding their breath at the same time. I leaned in again, lowering my voice. "I need you to help me understand," I said. "You're safe right now." He let out a shaky breath. "It's not about me," he said. "It's about what happens if I stop watching." That was as far as he got before his breathing sped up again, chest rising too fast, too shallow. The body doesn't wait for explanations. When it's done, it pushes forward whether the mind is ready or not. I reached for the syringe again, more gently this time. "I'm not here to take anything from you," I said. "I'm here to keep you comfortable." His eyes met mine, searching. "Comfort isn't always quiet," he said. That line stayed with me. I turned back to him. Heart steady voice, even professional mode fully engaged. "I need to help your breathing," I said. "We'll take this one step at a time." He watched the syringe again, jaw tight, eyes still wide. Outside the room, the house remained silent. Inside it, nothing felt settled. I steadied my hand and finished preparing the medication, even though every instinct told me to slow down and pay attention to what didn't belong in this moment. I'd learned a long time ago that when something feels off in patient care, it's usually not dramatic. It's quiet. It's a detail your brain flags before you have language for it. As I capped the syringe and set it back on the tray, I felt that familiar internal shift, the one that pulls you out of routine and into full awareness. The house was still too quiet. The patient was still too awake. And I was standing in a role I'd grown into slowly, not the one I'd started my career in. I didn't begin in hospice. No one does. You end up here after you've seen enough hospital floors to understand what medicine can do, and more importantly, what it can't. I spent my early years in ICU, the kind of place where alarms never stop and nobody whispers. People come in crashing and either leave alive or don't leave at all. Everything moves fast. Decisions are loud. Death is usually chaotic, full of tubes, machines, and people trying not to look scared. After that came oncology, slower deaths, longer conversations, families who learned to live in waiting rooms and memorize lab values they barely understood. That's where I learned how much suffering can stretch when hope refuses to let go. I learned how people bargain with time, how they cling to numbers and scans and phrases like stable and responding. Oncology teaches you patience. It also teaches you how exhaustion hides behind optimism. Hospice came later, after 40, after my marriage ended and my daughter left for college. People assume hospice nurses choose this work because we're gentle. The truth is, most of us choose it because we're tired of pretending medicine always fixes things. Hospice doesn't ask you to save anyone. It asks you to be honest. It asks you to sit with discomfort without trying to control it. That honesty is what drew me in. No codes, no chest compressions, no false promises. Comfort, dignity, presence, those were the rules I learned to work by. And for the most part, they worked. Standing in that bedroom, I reminded myself of all that. I reminded myself that fear near the end doesn't always make sense, that the brain under stress does strange things, that my job wasn't to decode meaning, but to manage symptoms. Still, the image of his eyes tracking the hallway stayed with me in a way I didn't like. I glanced toward the doorway. His daughter hadn't moved. She stood with her back against the wall, arms crossed tight, like she was bracing herself for bad news. She looked exhausted in the specific way caregivers do, the kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from lack of sleep alone, but from being alert all the time. When I met her eyes, she shook her head slightly, like she didn't want to interrupt, but needed me to understand something without saying it out loud. I stepped away from the bed and joined her near the doorway. "How long has he been like this?" I asked quietly. She swallowed. "A few days," she said. "At first he was just restless. Then he started telling the kids not to use the hallway. We thought it was confusion, but he's not confused." Her voice dropped. "He remembers everything. He knows who we are. He knows where he is." I nodded. That distinction mattered. Confusion you can explain. Awareness paired with fear is harder to manage. "Has he slept at all?" I asked. "Not really," she said. "Every time he starts to drift, he wakes himself up. He gets angry if the house is too quiet." That explains some of what I was seeing. Sleep deprivation alone can push the mind into dangerous territory, especially when paired with terminal illness. Still, the focus on one specific space in the house didn't sit right. I returned to the bedside and adjusted the oxygen flow slightly, watching his chest rise and fall. His breathing eased a fraction, but his eyes never left me. I worked in hospitals for a long time. I said partly to him and partly to myself, "I've seen a lot of ways people react when their bodies start letting go." He didn't respond, but his jaw tightened, like he was holding something back. In hospice, I continued keeping my tone neutral. We focus on comfort. That doesn't mean we ignore fear. It means we don't let fear run the room. His lips pressed together. "Hospitals make noise," he said suddenly. "This place listens." It was an odd thing to say, but not nonsensical. Hospice homes are quiet. Quiet gives the mind room to wander. I filed the comment away without reacting to it. I took a moment to check his chart again, flipping through notes, confirming dosages, grounding myself in the concrete. Vitals, meds, diagnosis. Facts don't fix fear, but they keep you steady when emotions start pulling. When I looked up, his gaze softened just a little. Not calmer, just tired. "You won't lie to me," he said. "No," I said, "I won't." That answer seemed to satisfy him, at least for the moment. He leaned back against the pillows, still tense, still alert, but less confrontational. The room felt like it exhaled just slightly. I finished the assessment, documenting what I could in my head for later charting. Terminal agitation, anxiety, possible delirium compounded by exhaustion, nothing outside protocol, and yet everything about the interaction felt heavier than it should have. As I gathered my supplies, I caught my reflection in the dark window across the room. Older than the nurse I used to be, quieter, more cautious. Hospice changes you that way. You stop rushing. You start listening to the things that don't announce themselves. Behind me, the hallway light flickered, faintly, then steadied. No one spoke. No one moved. The night outside pressed in, patient and waiting, and I stayed where I was aware that whatever I did next would matter more than usual. The hallway light stayed on even after I closed the bedroom door behind me, and I didn't reach to turn it off. That detail came back to me as I stood at the kitchen counter, later finishing the paperwork Megan had pushed aside hours earlier. Hospice intake forms are never dramatic. Names, dates, diagnoses, insurance information. Boxes you check so the system knows how to categorize the end of a life. I'd filled out thousands of them, but this one kept pulling my attention away from the page. I remembered the phone call that started it. It had come in just after 7 that evening while I was still sitting in my car outside another patient's house, dictating notes into my phone and debating whether I had enough energy left to stop for groceries. The number had popped up twice before I answered. Same area code, same caller. That alone told me it wasn't routine. When I picked up, the voice on the other end wasn't frantic. It wasn't sobbing. It sounded controlled, like someone trying very hard not to lose their grip. "Hi," she said. "They told me to call hospice directly." I introduced myself, asked the standard questions: who was calling, who the patient was, what diagnosis we were dealing with. She answered everything correctly, efficiently. Lung cancer, stage 4, brain involvement, declining quickly. She knew the language. That told me she'd been in hospitals long enough to learn it. "What's going on tonight?" I asked. There was a pause, not a short one, a measured pause. The kind where someone is deciding how much truth they can afford to say out loud. "He's not in pain," she said finally. "At least not the kind we can see." I waited. Silence does more work than reassurance during intake calls. "He keeps telling my kids not to walk down the hallway," she continued. "He says it's not safe." That was the first moment my pen stopped moving. People say strange things at the end of life. That wasn't unusual. What caught my attention was how she said it. Not dismissive, not apologetic. She didn't laugh it off or rush to explain it away. She sounded unsettled. "How old are the kids?" I asked. 6 and 9, she said. "They've started sleeping in the living room." That was when I leaned back against the car seat and stared at the windshield. Parents don't rearrange their children's sleep routines because of harmless confusion. They do it because something feels wrong in the house. I walked through the rest of the intake calmly. Medications, symptoms, recent changes. He'd stopped sleeping. He'd grown agitated when the house went quiet. He'd become fixated on that one part of the home. No fevers, no signs of infection. No new meds that would easily explain the shift. "Is he confused about who you are?" I asked. "No," she said. "He knows us. He knows where he is." That's what scares me. I'd heard fear like that before, usually from spouses watching someone slip away faster than expected. This was different. It was fear of presence, not absence. "I can come out tonight," I told her. "We'll get eyes on him and see what's going on." She exhaled sharply, like she'd been holding her breath since dialing. "Thank you," she said. Then quieter. "He's not acting like he's dying. He's acting like he's guarding something." I didn't respond to that. Nurses learn not to echo language that might escalate anxiety. Instead, I gave her an arrival window and ended the call. Back in the kitchen now, hours later, that sentence replayed in my head as I initialed the last page, guarding something. I dismissed it at the time as stress exhaustion, a mother projecting fear onto behavior she didn't understand. It was easier to think that way. It fit into training. I slid the paperwork into my bag and looked around the kitchen. Everything was tidy in an intentional way. Counters cleared, chairs pushed in, no half-finished drinks. No clutter, the kind of order families create when chaos feels too close for comfort. On the fridge, a drawing held up by a magnet caught my eye. Crayon lines, a house, 2 stick figures, one dark line down the center separating rooms. I turned away before I read too much into it. Megan stepped in behind me. "He doing okay?" she asked. "As okay as can be expected right now," I said. "I want to adjust his medications, but I don't want to rush it." She nodded, rubbing her hands together. He hates the quiet, she said. If the TV turns off, he gets tense, even if he's not watching. That lined up with what I'd seen. Silence leaves space for thoughts the body doesn't have energy to contain. Has he ever talked about this hallway before? I asked. She hesitated. Not until this week. And before the cancer, I pressed gently. She shook her head. He didn't talk about much of anything before the cancer. That too felt important. I followed her back toward the bedroom, my mind sorting through possibilities. Brain metastases can cause fixation. Anxiety can latch onto physical spaces. Exhaustion amplifies everything. There were explanations for all of it. I reminded myself of that as I stepped back into the room. He was still awake. His eyes tracked me immediately, the way they had earlier. Not startled, not relieved, just aware. The hallway light spilled in from behind me, casting a narrow line across the floor. You came back, he said. I'm still here, I replied. He nodded once, like that confirmed something he needed to know. His breathing remained fast, his chest rising unevenly, but he didn't look away this time. They don't listen, he said. Who? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. He lifted a hand weakly, gesturing past me. People who think quiet means safe. That was when I felt it again. That internal shift, sharper now. Not fear, recognition. This wasn't a symptom that wanted to scatter. It wanted to focus, and whatever had triggered it had started long before I ever answered that phone call. I shifted my body slightly so I wasn't blocking his view of the hallway, and the tension in his shoulders eased just enough for me to notice it. That alone told me how much attention he'd been giving that space. He wasn't just aware of it, he was orienting himself around it. I'd seen patients track monitors, doors, windows. Tracking a hallway like this was different. It wasn't about escape, it was about control. I moved closer to the bed and lowered myself into the chair beside it, careful not to rush. In hospice, rushing reads as panic even when you think you're being efficient. His breathing stayed fast, but it became more regular as I settled in. Sometimes presence does more than medication, at least temporarily. You don't have to watch it every second, I said. I'm here. His jaw tightened. You can't stay all night. He wasn't wrong, and the fact that he knew that mattered. I'll be here for a while, I said. We'll make a plan. Plans are a kind of currency in hospice. Even when the outcome is certain, people need to feel like something is being managed. I stood and walked toward the doorway, deliberately slow, letting him see where I was going. As I reached the threshold, I stopped and looked down the hallway myself. It was narrow, carpeted, lit by a single overhead fixture that cast more shadow than light. Doors on either side. The kids' room at the end. Nothing unusual, no movement, no sound. Still, the air felt heavy in that way houses do when too many people are trying not to make noise. When I turned back, his eyes followed me, searching my face. You see it now, he said. I see the hallway, I answered honestly. That's what it wants, he said, to look normal. I didn't respond to that, not because it scared me, but because responding would give it weight it didn't deserve yet. Instead, I stepped fully into the hallway, then back again, showing him nothing changed. His breathing spiked, then settled. Control, even the illusion of it, mattered to him. Behind me, I heard a soft sound, Megan's voice low and tense. They're awake. I turned and saw her crouched near the living room entrance. Two small shapes huddled together on the couch under a blanket. The TV was on volume low, casting flickering light across the room. Neither child was watching it. Their eyes were fixed on the hallway. Children don't need explanations to know when something is wrong. They read the room better than adults ever do. I walked toward them and knelt down, keeping my voice calm. Hey, I said, it's late. You guys doing okay? The older one nodded without looking at me. The younger pressed closer to her brother. Can they stay here? Megan asked. Just tonight. They're fine here, I said. They're safe. I meant physically safe. I was careful not to promise anything else. As I stood, I took in the rest of the house. Every lamp was on, no overhead lights, soft light everywhere like the family had learned. Brightness made things worse. The thermostat was set higher than necessary. Cold makes people feel exposed. Warmth creates the illusion of protection. Back in the bedroom, I resumed the assessment I'd started earlier, checking his skin, his pulse, the subtle changes that tell you how close the body is to letting go. Cool and clammy, pulse thready but steady. He was working too hard, but he was still here. I documented mentally as I went, already planning what I'd chart later. Terminal agitation, anxiety, sleep deprivation, no signs of acute pain crisis. Everything pointed towards symptom management, and yet the environment told a different story. This wasn't just happening inside his body, it had spilled into the house. I don't want them near it, he said suddenly. I know, I said. That's why they're staying out here. That's not enough, he said. It listens. That word again, listens. I'd heard patients assign intention to symptoms before. It's the mind's way of organizing fear. I reminded myself of that as I adjusted his pillows and raised the head of the bed slightly to ease his breathing. Right now, I said, your body needs rest. He laughed softly, a sound without humor. Rest is when it moves. I straightened and met his gaze. You're exhausted, I said. Anyone would be after days without sleep. That's what it wants, he said again. I stepped back and took a slow breath, grounding myself. When you let patients steer the narrative too far into their fear, you lose the ability to help. When you shut them down completely, you lose their trust. There's a narrow line between the two. I need to give you something to help calm your body, I said. We can start small. He watched my hands as I reached for the medication tray again. This time his fear didn't spike. It settled into something heavier, resignation maybe, or calculation. You'll stay until it works, he said. I'll stay and monitor you, I replied. That's not the same thing. No, I said, but it's what I can do. He nodded once. Acceptance doesn't always look peaceful. Sometimes it looks like giving up ground inch by inch. As I prepared the dose, I heard the house creak softly, the kind of sound old homes make when the temperature shifts. His eyes snapped to the hallway again, muscles tensing. I paused, syringe in hand, and waited. He forced himself to look back at me, breathing fast, eyes wide but focused. If I stop watching, he said, promise you won't let them go down there. I won't, I said, and meant it in the only way I could. The medication went in smoothly, no resistance, no sudden movements. His breathing began to slow just slightly. The effect was subtle but real. I stayed beside him, one hand resting lightly on the bed rail, listening to the rhythm of his breath change. Outside the room, the TV murmured quietly. The kids shifted under the blanket, but didn't move closer to the hallway. Nothing dramatic happened. No sudden calm, no relief. Just a fragile balance settling into place, the kind that feels temporary, even when you don't say it out loud. I watched the medication take hold the way it usually does, slowly and without ceremony. His breathing didn't suddenly become calm or deep. It eased just enough that his chest wasn't fighting itself with every inhale. His shoulders lowered a fraction. The muscles around his eyes relaxed, but they never closed. He stayed awake exactly the way he'd asked. That alone told me how tightly he was holding on. I checked his pulse again. Still thready, still fast, but no longer racing. From a clinical standpoint, this was working. If I were charting it, I would have written partial response and moved on. Standing there, though, I felt the gap between what the numbers said and what the room felt like. I pulled the chair closer and sat down, clipboard resting against my knee. Hospice care is built on observation. You don't hover, but you don't disappear either. You sit close enough that patients know you're there, far enough that they don't feel watched. "You're doing okay," I said. He didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on my face now, like he was measuring something. Trust, maybe, or timing. I used the quiet to walk myself through the explanation I'd already rehearsed in my head. Brain metastases can cause changes in perception. Anxiety amplifies fixation. Sleep deprivation strips away the brain's ability to filter intrusive thoughts. All of that fit, every piece lined up neatly. It should have been enough, but explanations don't always quiet fear. Sometimes they make it sharper. I turned slightly and spoke toward the doorway. "Megan," I said, "can you come in for a minute?" She stepped into the room, careful not to block the hallway, a habit she'd already picked up without realizing it. I gestured for her to sit on the edge of the bed. She did, taking her father's hand gently, like she was afraid sudden movement might break him. "Here's what I'm seeing," I said. "His body is under a lot of stress. The cancer has affected his brain, which can change how he processes space and sound. That, combined with exhaustion, can make certain fears feel very real." She nodded, listening closely. "Caregivers want facts. Facts give them something solid to hold." "So he's hallucinating," she said. "Not exactly," I replied. "He's not seeing things that aren't there. He's assigning meaning to things that are." Her brow furrowed. "What does that mean?" "It means his fear has found a place to live," I said. "Right now, that place is the hallway." That seemed to land. She looked toward the doorway, then back at her father. He let out a slow breath. "It wasn't always that," he said. I turned back to him. "What was it before?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Doesn't matter. It did matter, but pushing too hard would close him off. Hospice is full of these small negotiations, deciding when to ask and when to wait. What matters right now," I said, "is keeping your body from working this hard. You don't have to stay this tense." "That's how things slip through," he said quietly. Megan's grip tightened on his hand. "Dad," she said, "you're safe." He didn't look at her. "You think quiet means safe," he said. "It doesn't." I shifted in my chair, grounding myself. I'd seen this pattern before, just never this focused. When the brain starts losing its ability to manage threat perception, it narrows the field. Everything dangerous becomes one thing, one place, one idea. It's terrifying for the patient and exhausting for everyone else. "I want to increase the medication slightly," I said, turning back to Megan. "Not enough to sedate him, but enough to take the edge off." She nodded, then stopped. "Will he sleep?" "Maybe," I said honestly. "Maybe not right away." Her eyes flicked to her father. "What if he doesn't want to?" "That's something we'll navigate together," I said. I prepared the dose carefully, double-checking the amount. Hospice meds aren't about knocking people out. They're about balance. Too little and you leave someone suffering. Too much and you take away moments families aren't ready to lose. As I worked, I felt his gaze on my hands again. "You're good at this," he said. "I've had practice," I replied. "Practice doesn't teach you what to watch for," he said. "It teaches you what people miss." I didn't respond to that. I focused on the task, on the tangible. When I administered the medication, his body didn't resist. His breathing slowed another notch. His eyes softened, but they stayed open. I stayed with him, monitoring, listening. The house around us seemed to settle just slightly. The TV volume lowered. The kids' voices faded. Megan leaned back in the chair, exhaustion catching up to her now that the immediate crisis had eased. "This isn't how I thought it would be," she said quietly. "No one does," I said. "I thought he'd be scared of dying," she continued. "I didn't think he'd be scared of this." I nodded. Fear doesn't always point where we expect it to. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Caregivers often hold it together until the professional names what they're already feeling. I checked the clock. Not late, but late enough that the night felt established. Nights change things. Fear feels louder when the world goes still. I stood and adjusted the blinds, slightly letting in a sliver of streetlight. Complete darkness can make orientation harder. He watched me do it, but his reaction was muted, now less sharp. "You're still watching," he said. "Yes," I replied. "Good," he said. "It behaves better when someone's paying attention." I wrote that down mentally, not as fact, but as pattern. His language wasn't random. It was consistent. That meant something. As I gathered my things, preparing to step out briefly and update Megan on what to watch for overnight, I felt the familiar frustration rise. I could explain the mechanisms. I could manage the symptoms. What I couldn't do was convince him his fear wasn't necessary. That's one of the hardest lessons in hospice. Sometimes the body settles before the mind does. And when that happens, you're left sitting in the space between explanation and experience, doing your best not to let either one take over. The house sounded different once everyone tried to sleep. Not louder, quieter in a way that made every small noise stand out. The refrigerator cycling on, the soft click of the thermostat, the faint hum of the oxygen concentrator in the bedroom. I noticed all of it as I sat at the dining table, laptop open, finishing my notes while keeping one ear tuned to the hallway. I hadn't planned to stay this late. Hospice visits usually taper off once medication settles in and families find their rhythm for the night. But something about this house didn't want to settle, and leaving felt wrong in a way I couldn't chart. Megan had tried to convince me it was okay to go. "We'll call if anything changes." She said. She'd said it the way caregivers do when they don't actually believe it. I stayed. Around midnight, the kids finally fell asleep on the couch, tangled together under the blanket. Megan turned the TV off, hesitated, then turned it back on with the volume barely above silence. She didn't say why. She didn't have to. I checked on him again. His breathing was slower now, still shallow but less frantic. His eyes were open, though they didn't track me the way they had earlier. He looked tired in the deep bone-level way that comes from days without rest. "You okay?" I asked quietly. He nodded once. "It's quieter." "Yes," I said. "That's when it moves," he replied. I resisted the urge to correct him. Correction rarely helps at this stage. What matters is keeping fear from escalating into panic. I pulled the chair closer and sat. "Nothing has changed since earlier," I said. "Same house, same hallway." He watched the ceiling. "Not me. It doesn't need change," he said. "It needs permission." That sentence landed harder than the others, not because of what it suggested, but because of how calmly he said it. Panic had a rhythm I recognized. This wasn't that. This was controlled, deliberate. I glanced at the monitor again. Oxygen saturation stable. Heart rate elevated but steady. From the outside, he was improving. Inside, something else was happening. I stepped out into the hallway and spoke softly to Megan. "If he wakes up more agitated, call me right away," I said. "Don't wait." She nodded, eyes already tired. "He keeps listening," she said, "like he's waiting for something." So are you, I said gently. She gave a tired half smile. I guess I am. It was just after 1 when he called my name again. Elaine, not loud, not urgent, clear. I was back at his bedside in seconds. I'm here. His eyes were sharper now, more focused than they'd been all night. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking past me toward the hallway. It's closer, he said. I followed his gaze. The hallway looked exactly the same. Light on, doors closed. Still. What makes you say that? I asked. He swallowed. It's listening harder. That word again. Listening. I'd heard patients describe pain as sharp or burning, fear as crushing or heavy. Listening implied awareness, intention. It made his fear feel organized, not chaotic. I checked his pulse again. Faster now. His breathing picked up shallow and uneven. The fragile balance we'd built earlier was tipping. I'm going to give you a little more medication, I said. Just enough to help your body calm down. He shook his head more forcefully this time. Not yet. His hand lifted from the blanket, fingers trembling as they reached for my wrist. The grip was weak but purposeful. If I sleep, I can't keep them safe. The word them hung in the air. The kids are safe, I said. They're not near the hallway. That's not enough, he said. It doesn't need them there. It just needs me to stop paying attention. That was the moment I understood something important. This wasn't random fear. This was responsibility. He believed deeply that staying awake was an act of protection. I glanced toward the doorway. Megan stood there, frozen, listening. She didn't interrupt. She'd learned, like I had, that interrupting made things worse. I can't let your body do this all night, I said. You're exhausting yourself. That's the point, he replied. If I'm tired enough, I won't forget. Forget what? He looked at me, then really looked at me. His eyes were clear in a way that made my chest tighten. Why this started? Before I could ask another question, his breathing spiked. The words cost him more than he could afford. I administered a small dose slower than before, watching his face for any sign of distress. He resisted at first, muscles tensing, jaw clenched, but then the medication began to work its way in. His grip loosened. His hand fell back to the blanket. He didn't sleep. Instead, his body settled into a restless stillness, eyes half-lidded but alert, breathing slower but uneven, like someone pretending to rest while keeping watch. I stayed seated beside him, charting, mentally listening. Outside the room, the house creaked softly as it cooled. Somewhere a car passed on the street, headlights briefly sweeping across the window. He flinched at the change in light. It notices movement, he murmured. Nothing is coming in, I said. The doors are locked. That's not how it gets in, he replied. I didn't answer. I adjusted the oxygen tubing and checked his skin again, grounding myself in tasks. Tasks keep you from spiraling when emotions threaten to take over. Minutes passed, maybe more. Time stretches strangely during night shifts. At some point, Megan sank into a chair near the bed, exhaustion pulling her down despite her effort to stay alert. I don't think he's hallucinating, she whispered. I didn't contradict her. Hallucination wasn't the right word anyway. This was fixation layered over belief. I've seen this before, I said quietly. Not exactly like this, but close. What happened? She asked. The fear shifted, I said. Sometimes it gets quieter before it changes shape. As if on cue, he stirred again. His eyes opened wider, scanning, tracking along the wall now instead of the hallway itself. His breathing sped up, chest hitching. No, he said. That's not where it's supposed to be. I stood heart steady but alert. This wasn't escalation yet, but it was moving. His fear was no longer anchored to one place. It was spreading. I reached for the medication tray again, already calculating my next steps, aware that whatever was unfolding in his mind was gaining momentum faster than his body could handle. I lowered the medication tray back onto the table when I saw his breathing change again, not faster this time, but steadier, almost deliberate. The shift was subtle. If you weren't trained to watch for it, you'd miss it. His chest rose and fell with intention, not panic. His eyes stopped darting along the wall and settled somewhere neutral, unfocused, but present. I'd seen this before, though, never quite like this. The storm inside his head hadn't ended. It had organized itself. "Elaine," he said quietly. The way he said my name was different now. No urgency, no fear, just clarity. I stepped closer. "I'm here." He took a slow breath, then another. "I need to tell you something." Megan straightened in her chair. Her exhaustion lifted instantly, replaced by that fragile hope families get when a loved one suddenly sounds like themselves again. She leaned forward, ready to listen. He didn't look at her. "I don't want her to hear this," he said. The room tightened. Megan opened her mouth to protest, then stopped herself. I met her eyes and gave a small nod. She hesitated, then stood and stepped into the hallway, leaving the door partially open. The hallway light spilled across the floor, unchanged, ordinary. His gaze stayed on the ceiling. "I wasn't always like this," he said. "I didn't used to be afraid." "What changed?" I asked. He let out a breath that sounded like relief. I stopped paying attention. I waited. Terminal clarity doesn't last long. You don't interrupt it unless you have to. "I worked at the plant for 32 years, he continued. "Started on the floor, worked my way up. People think that means something. It just means you learn how to look past things. Like what I asked, like warning signs," he said, "like reports that make your stomach feel wrong." His eyes flicked briefly toward the hallway, then back. I signed off on things I shouldn't have. That was the first time he'd said it out loud. I didn't respond. This wasn't a confession that wanted absolution. It wanted witness. "They weren't dramatic decisions," he said. "No explosions, no headlines, just shortcuts. Delays, pushing fixes down the line because the numbers worked better that way." He swallowed, throat working. I told myself if it was really dangerous, someone else would stop it. "That's a common belief," I said carefully. "Yes," he replied. "It's how everyone sleeps at night." His breathing remained steady, controlled. The clarity held. "There was an inspection once," he said. "A real one. Not the kind you prepare for. I knew what they'd find if they looked too closely, so I made sure they didn't." The words landed quietly without drama. Megan shifted in the hallway, listening despite herself. "I didn't hurt anyone directly," he said almost defensively. "Not with my hands, not like that." But I said, "But I knew," he finished. "I knew people would live with the consequences. I just didn't think it would follow me." His eyes finally met mine. They were clear, painful in their honesty. I thought if I didn't look at it, it would stop existing. The hallway light hummed faintly. The oxygen concentrator clicked as it cycled. Ordinary sounds framing an extraordinary moment. "That's not how it works," I said gently. "No, he agreed. "It isn't." He closed his eyes briefly, then forced them open again. "The hallway," he said. "That's where it started. At home. Years ago. I'd walk past my kids' rooms and think about what would happen if something went wrong. If something I approved came back to them." My chest tightened. "And now I can't stop seeing it," he said. "Every time it gets quiet, everything I pushed away shows up. This wasn't hallucination. This was memory stripped of defenses. The dying brain has a way of doing that, pulling everything forward at once when there's no energy left to suppress it." "I don't want it near them," he said. "Not now, not ever." "You're not a danger to them," I said. I know, he replied, but what I left behind is. The words settled heavily between us. I heard Megan inhale sharply in the hallway, then press her hand over her mouth. I stayed focused on him. This moment wasn't about family reconciliation or forgiveness. It was about truth arriving too late to be useful and too loud to ignore. You're not being punished, I said, choosing my words carefully. This isn't judgment. He let out a short, humorless laugh. It feels like accounting. That was the most accurate description I'd heard all night. The clarity began to flicker then. His breathing hitched slightly. His eyes drifted, then refocused with effort. Terminal clarity burns bright and fast. It doesn't linger. I don't want to sleep, he said. If I sleep, it all blurs again. I don't want it to blur. Why? I asked. Because this is the first time I've been honest, he said, and I don't want to lose that. I rested my hand lightly on the bed rail. You've said what needed to be said. He shook his head. Not to the right person. Megan stepped back into the room, tears on her face. Dad, she said softly. He turned his head toward her eyes, struggling to focus. I didn't protect what I should have, he said. I thought silence was safer. Her breath caught. I don't understand. That's okay, he replied. You don't have to. The clarity wavered again. His breathing grew uneven, the edges of panic creeping back in as the window closed. I reached for the medication tray, knowing the balance had shifted. His body was losing the energy to hold the truth without fear riding alongside it. He watched my hand. Don't take it away yet, he said. Just a minute. I paused, respecting the request. The hallway light remained steady. The house stayed quiet. Inside the room, the air felt heavy with things finally named, even as the moment threatened to slip out of reach. I lifted the syringe again when his breathing tipped from uneven into frantic, the kind that tells you the body is slipping out of alignment faster than words can keep up. He tried to sit up, not a sudden lurch, but a determined push, elbows digging into the mattress as if he needed leverage against something invisible. The effort shook his frame. His chest heaved, breaths coming in short bursts that never quite finished before the next one started. Easy, I said, stepping closer. You're working too hard. His hands clawed at the blanket, fingers trembling. It's moving, he said, voice thin and strained. Not there, along the wall. I followed his line of sight as a matter of habit, not belief. The wall was bare. No shadows, no changes in light. The hallway light stayed steady. Megan hovered near the door, frozen, her hands pressed together like she didn't trust herself not to interfere. I checked his pulse again. Rapid, irregular, adrenaline was flooding a body that didn't have the reserves to handle it. This wasn't just anxiety anymore. This was physical crisis layered on top of psychological distress. I'm giving you something now, I said, already drawing up the next dose. This will help your body slow down. No, he said sharply. He twisted toward me with surprising strength, nearly knocking the syringe from my hand. Not yet. His movement pulled the oxygen tubing loose from his face. The concentrator alarm chirped once, a sharp sound that cut through the room. Megan gasped. I've got it, I said, keeping my voice calm as I reattached the cannula and adjusted the flow. The alarm stopped. His breathing didn't. He grabbed my wrist, again gripped tighter this time, knuckles white with effort. If I sleep, it spreads, he said. I can't hold it if I sleep. I placed my other hand over his, firm but gentle. Your body can't keep this up, I said. You're not protecting anyone by hurting yourself. He shook his head violently, veins standing out in his neck. You don't understand, he said. It's not about me. I met Megan's eyes over his shoulder. She looked terrified, not of him, but for him. Elaine, she whispered, what do we do? This is the part no one prepares families for. The moment when comfort care becomes active containment, when the goal shifts from easing distress to preventing harm. I'm calling the on-call physician, I said. We need support. I stepped back just long enough to make the call, giving a concise report while keeping my eyes on him. Terminal agitation escalating, severe anxiety, physical restlessness, risk of self-injury. The physician agreed with the plan. Increase medication. Consider soft restraints if necessary to maintain safety. I ended the call and turned back to the bed. He was fighting the pillows now, legs kicking weakly under the covers, chest heaving. The effort was draining him fast. I don't want to restrain him, Megan said, voice shaking. I don't either, I replied, and I won't unless we have to. I moved closer and spoke directly to him, lowering my voice. I need you to work with me, I said. I can't help you if you keep fighting. He gasped, eyes wide, darting again to the wall. It's closer, he said. It's learned. That's the fear talking, I said. Not reality, but it's real to me, he shot back. I know, I said. That's why I'm here. I administered the medication, slowly watching his reaction. His body resisted at first, muscles stiffening, then gradually softened as the drug took effect. The change wasn't dramatic. It never is. His movement slowed. The thrashing eased into restless shifting. His breathing dropped from frantic to labored. I stayed close, monitoring, adjusting, keeping my hand where he could feel it without feeling restrained. Restraints are a last resort in hospice. They protect bodies, but they can shatter trust. I didn't want to break what little trust we still had. Megan sank into the chair beside the bed, tears slipping down her face silently. Why is he so scared? She whispered. He was never like this. I didn't sugarcoat it. Because his mind doesn't have the strength to keep things buried anymore, I said. Everything he avoided is coming up at once. That's not fair, she said. No, I agreed. It isn't. He moaned softly, a sound caught between pain and frustration. His eyes fluttered, half closing, then snapping open again like he was afraid to let go even for a second. I'm still watching, he murmured. I know, I said. You don't have to do it alone. His breathing hitched again, then settled. The medication was finally gaining ground. His body began to sag into the mattress, the fight draining out of him inch by inch. I adjusted the blankets, keeping them loose, checked his skin again. Cool, damp, signs of autonomic decline. This was taking a toll. Minutes passed, maybe more. Time loses shape in moments like this. The house stayed quiet, the kids asleep on the couch, unaware of how close the night had come to breaking open. His eyes drifted shut for the first time all evening. His breath slowed, then stuttered, then found a new rhythm, not restful, not peaceful, but less desperate. I stayed standing at the bedside, watching, listening. Megan reached out and touched his arm, gently testing the moment. Dad, she whispered. His eyes opened again, just a slit. Don't let them, he said, voice barely audible. I won't, I said, though I knew by now that whatever he was afraid of wasn't something I could block with my body. The crisis ebbed, not because it resolved, but because his body no longer had the energy to sustain it. That's the part people don't understand. Sometimes stabilization isn't victory, it's exhaustion. I documented the changes in my head, already planning what needed to happen next. Adjustments, monitoring, preparation. As I stood there watching his chest rise and fall in uneven waves, I understood something with uncomfortable clarity. We hadn't calmed the fear. We'd only slowed the body enough to keep it from tearing itself apart. His breathing changed before anything else did. Not suddenly, not dramatically. It slowed in a way that felt intentional, like the body was no longer negotiating. Each breath came deeper, then shallower, then paused, just long enough to make Megan lean forward every time. I watched the pattern settle in the one hospice nurses learned to recognize without being taught. Cheney Stokes. I checked the clock without meaning to. Just after 3 in the morning. The house felt suspended in that strange stretch of night where time loses its edges. Outside, the street was empty. Inside, everything narrowed to the space around the bed. I adjusted his oxygen slightly, not to change the outcome, just to make the work of breathing easier. His chest rose in uneven waves now, each inhale followed by a longer pause. The pauses stretched, then shortened, then stretched again. Megan noticed before I said anything. "Is this it?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "He's getting close," I said. "I don't think it will be long." She nodded once as if she'd already known and was just waiting for permission to acknowledge it. She reached for his hand again, holding it carefully like the pressure itself mattered. His eyes were half open, unfocused, but not empty. I'd seen that look many times. It isn't awareness the way we understand it, but it isn't absence either. It's something in between. I leaned closer. "Robert," I said, using his name deliberately. "You're not alone." His breathing stuttered, then resumed. A wet sound crept in at the back of his throat, low and uneven. The death rattle. Families always hate that sound. It feels violent even when it isn't. "He's not choking," I said quietly before Megan could ask. "It sounds worse than it feels." She nodded, tears sliding down her face silently. "Dad," she said, "I'm here." The kids stirred on the couch outside the room, shifting under the blanket, but they didn't wake. Children have a way of sensing when the house is holding its breath. They stayed still instinctively. I repositioned him slightly, turning his head to the side to help with secretions. His skin had taken on that mottled look, purplish patterns creeping up from his feet. Circulation was shutting down, pulling inward. The body was conserving what little it had left. His breathing slowed again. One breath, long pause, another breath, longer pause. Megan's grip tightened. "Please," she whispered. "Please." I didn't interrupt. This wasn't a moment for explanations. He stirred faintly, eyes drifting toward the hallway one last time. Not sharply, not fearfully, just habit maybe, or memory. I stepped slightly into his line of sight, not blocking the hallway completely, just enough that he could see me if he focused. "It's okay," I said. "You don't have to watch anymore." His brow furrowed weakly. A tiny shake of the head, barely perceptible. "Still," he murmured. "Still what Megan asked, leaning closer." He didn't answer. His chest rose again, slower this time, then fell. The pause that followed stretched longer than the others. I checked his pulse at the carotid artery fingers, light practice. Faint, irregular, slipping. Another breath came shallow and incomplete. Then nothing. Megan gasped softly. "Dad," I waited. Hospice teaches you to wait. The body often pauses like this before deciding whether to take another breath. I counted silently. 5 seconds. 10. Nothing. His chest remained still. No rise, no fall. Just quiet. I leaned in again, listening, watching for any sign of movement. His pulse faded under my fingers, then disappeared altogether. Time of death, 3:48 a.m. I straightened slowly, meeting Megan's eyes. She knew before I said anything. Her face collapsed, grief breaking through the fear that had held her together for days. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against the mattress, sobbing into the blankets. "I'm sorry," she said over and over. "I'm so sorry." I placed a hand on her back, steady, supportive, the way I'd done for countless families before. Grief sounds different when fear is gone. It's raw but cleaner somehow. When she pulled back, I helped her straighten his blankets, smoothing them gently. His face had relaxed in death, the tension gone. His eyes were still slightly open, gaze angled toward the hallway, but there was no urgency in it now, just stillness. I closed his eyes carefully, a small act of dignity that feels larger than it is. His skin was cool beneath my fingers. I stepped out into the living room and knelt by the couch. "Your grandpa isn't hurting anymore," I said softly to the kids. "He died peacefully." They didn't cry, they just nodded understanding in the quiet way children do. One of them asked if their mom was okay. I told them she would be. Back in the bedroom, I completed the necessary checks documenting what needed to be documented, moving through the routine that anchors moments like this. Pronouncement, notifications, next steps. The practical side of death doesn't stop just because the emotional side has begun. Megan stood near the window, now arms wrapped around herself, staring out into the dark. "He was so scared," she said quietly. "I didn't know how to help him." "You did help him," I said. "You stayed." She nodded, wiping her face. "What was he so afraid of?" I thought of his words, of responsibility, of silence, of the things people believe will stay buried if they don't look at them. "He wasn't afraid of dying," I said carefully. "He was afraid of remembering." She absorbed that without responding. As the house settled into its new quiet, I stood beside the bed a moment longer, listening to the absence where breath had been. The hallway light still glowed unchanged. It didn't matter anymore. The night didn't feel heavy now, just finished. I stepped out onto the porch just before sunrise and let the cool air hit my face. The kind of quiet that only comes after something irreversible has happened. The house behind me felt different already, not empty, lighter, like a weight had shifted even though grief was still settling in. Inside, Megan moved slowly through the motions I'd explained to her, calling the funeral home, answering questions from relatives who hadn't been there to hear the breathing change or feel the night stretch out. The kids sat at the table with mugs of hot chocolate they barely touched, eyes red but calm, their fear spent. I finished my final documentation in the car, hands steady muscle memory carrying me through the routine. Time of death, medications administered, family present. I closed the chart and sat there for a moment longer than necessary, watching the sun start to edge up over the houses across the street. Hospice follow-ups are part of the job. We don't just disappear after someone dies. A week later, sometimes two, we come back to check in, answer questions, make sure families are connected to grief resources. Closure isn't a medical term, but it's a practical one. When I returned to the house days later, the difference was immediate. Curtains were open, sunlight spilled across the living room, toys were back on the floor where they belonged, scattered and loud in color. The TV was off, but the silence felt normal now, not charged. Megan greeted me at the door with a tired smile. "The kids are at school," she said. "This is the first quiet morning we've had." We sat at the dining table and went through the usual checklist. How everyone was sleeping, who had been helpful, what still felt overwhelming. She answered honestly, without drama. Grief had replaced fear, and while grief is heavy, it's familiar. People know how to hold it. When we finished, she hesitated, then stood and walked toward the bookshelf near the hallway. She opened a drawer beneath it and pulled out a folded piece of paper, edges worn like it had been handled more than once. "I found this the day after he died," she said, sliding it across the table. It was under his water cup. I unfolded it carefully. 4 names written in shaky but legible handwriting. No explanations, no dates, just names. And next to each one, the same phrase repeated in faint ink: keep them away from the children. My stomach tightened, not with fear, but with recognition. This wasn't a goodbye. It wasn't a confession. It was a reminder. Do you recognize any of them? I asked. She shook her head. No, my mom doesn't either. We thought maybe coworkers, but he never talked about them. I folded the paper back up and handed it to her. You don't have to solve this, I said. Not everything he carried needs to become yours. She nodded, though. I could tell curiosity was already working its way in. It always does. Silence leaves questions behind. That night after my shift ended, I looked the names up. Not because I thought I'd find anything dramatic, but because unanswered things tend to follow you home in this job if you let them. The results were quiet, scattered, and unsettling in their sameness. Obituaries, short ones, accidents, a workplace incident, a single car crash, an overdose, a suicide, different places, different years, none of them recent, none of them connected in any official way, except one thing. Every one of them had ties to the same industry, the same kind of work, the kind of work where decisions are made far away from consequences. I closed my laptop and sat back, the house around me quiet. There was nothing actionable there, no evidence, no story that wanted to be told out loud, just context. I didn't feel afraid. I didn't feel like I'd uncovered something forbidden. I felt sad in the plainest sense of the word. Hospice doesn't deal in villains or heroes. It deals in people who reach the end with whatever they've managed to carry that far. Some carry love. Some carry regret. Some carry things they never had the courage or language to confront until the defenses drop. In his final days, Robert wasn't haunted by something external. He wasn't seeing threats or shadows or anything supernatural. He was seeing himself clearly for the first time, without distraction, without justification. The hallway wasn't a warning about the future. It was a reminder of the past, a place where everything he'd avoided lined up and waited for him to stop looking away. That's what terminal clarity can do. It strips things down. It doesn't create new fears. It exposes old ones. People ask hospice nurses all the time if we believe dying patients see things others can't. Angels, loved ones, signs. I don't argue with them. Belief is personal and comfort takes many forms. What I believe after years in hospitals and hospice homes is simpler. I believe that when the body runs out of energy, the mind runs out of excuses. Whatever you've been pushing down has a way of rising up when there's nothing left to hold it there. Some people make peace with that. Some people fight it. Some people stay awake watching, convinced vigilance can still protect the people they love. When I think back on that night, I don't picture his fear. I picture his focus, the way he stayed present, alert, committed to what he thought was his responsibility, even as his body failed him. The kids are fine now. They play in the hallway without thinking about it. The house sounds like a house again. Life moved forward the way it always does. For me, that case settled into the part of my memory reserved for reminders. Not about death, but about living. About what happens when accountability is postponed long enough that it becomes something you have to face alone. I don't check the hallway in my own house. I don't expect to see anything waiting for me, but I do pay attention to the things that make my stomach feel wrong, the reports that don't sit right, the shortcuts that ask to be ignored. Hospice has taught me many things: how to manage pain, how to sit with grief, how to recognize the moment a body lets go. What that patient taught me was quieter and harder to measure. Some people aren't afraid of dying. They're afraid of finally remembering who they were when it mattered. I've worked in hospitals long enough to know that medicine can explain a lot, but it can't explain everything people carry with them to the end. Hospice just removes the noise. No monitors screaming, no procedures to hide behind, just a person, their memories, and whatever they never finished dealing with. That case stayed with me not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. It reminded me that doctors and nurses don't just witness death. We witness the cost of a lifetime of choices when there's finally nowhere left to run from them. And sometimes the most disturbing patients aren't frightening because of what they see, but because of what they remember. If you're interested in real hospital experiences, true doctors and nurses' stories, and the kind of moments healthcare workers don't usually talk about, consider subscribing to the channel. These stories aren't about shock. They're about what really happens when the work ends and the truth finally has room to speak.